Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Rose Cabral, and I'm so glad you're here today. I know we had a lot of people register. Some people are going to be live, other people are going to be catching the replay. So, thank you for being here. I love when you're here so you can type in the chat and I can get your feedback and your questions and all of that. So, thanks for joining. Let me pull up my information that I had to share. All right, let's do. Okay, let me share my screen. Here we go. All right. Can you see my screen? It has a beautiful picture. Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So today we are going to be talking about whose land are you living on? And again, I'm Rose Cabral, Community Rose. So first, I just want to say thank you for joining. You belong here, especially if you are a single woman, an artist, creative, social justice champion. Maybe you're renting, you're retired, you're a homeowner. Basically, everyone is welcome. So I like to just do an extra special welcome to people in these communities: queer community, trans, divorced, widow, millennial, Gen Z. Maybe you're looking to buy a home and you want to be thoughtful about it. Maybe you want to be a good steward of the home that you are in now. So welcome. Okay, so today whose land are you living on? We're going to be talking about we're going to kind of go on a little journey. We're going to talk about land. We're going to talk about who lived on the land before us. We're going to be talking about how is land used now. And then we're going to be talking about, now that we know all of this information, how are we going to take it and move forward with our life and how we impact other people. And this might matter to you because you live in a community and you are interested in learning about who used to live where you are living now. Or maybe you hear the land acknowledgements at meetings and you want to know more about them. And maybe you want to become a better steward of your home or your community or the land that you live on, the land that you visit. And just imagine with me for a moment, if we had more information about who was here before us, would we think about land differently? And so when we get to the end, I might ask you if you think about land differently now that you've maybe learned something new. So just keep that question in mind. And I have a question for you before we get started. Is what are you interested in learning, or what brought you here today? Is there anything in particular you want to share about why you showed up here tonight? Oh, Jenny, we got to press the unmute button. Let's see. Here.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My first time on Zoom.
Oh, wow. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm interested in what the land where my house is was used for before it was housing. I've heard from people who lived here before I did that the entire area used to be a giant chicken ranch. But I'm interested in the past.
Cool. And where are you joining us from today?
I am on 57th Street, just south of 14th Avenue.
Okay, great. That's Tahoe Park, right? Tahoe Park.
Well, it's technically Colonial Heights, but a block over is Tahoe Park.
Okay, you're right. Yes, you're right. Thank you. You're just on the border there. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Anyone else want to share what you're excited about learning about today or interested in? What brought you here?
I'm just I'm just interested in learning what other neighbors are thinking about land and who else out there in this neighborhood and elsewhere are paying attention to these things.
Awesome. Thanks. Neighbors. Yeah, thanks for joining, neighbors. I love it. All right. So I hope we'll answer some of those questions, and definitely we have an hour. I'm not going to go into I can't go into the history of every single thing, but we will do our best. So a little bit about me real quick, just so you know who this person is that's talking to you, if you don't know me already. I'm Rose, and this is a little bit about me. I live in Sacramento, California. I'm part of the Sacramento Community Land Trust. I'm part of our advocating for our unhoused population here in Sacramento. I went to the Bold Speaker Series last month, and it was really fun. And I have a chicken and a cat, a 20-year-old cat. And then in my real estate life, since this is part of my real estate free monthly course that I give every month, this is my real estate life. So I've been a real estate agent for 12 years. I volunteer at Loaves and Fishes. I love giving homeowners their keys and just everything about home, which is why I am excited about this topic, because it's thinking about who used to live on our home, the land that we call home now. And yeah, I love talking about everything home. Actually, I have a podcast coming out soon about home too. So that's a little bit about me. My goal is to demystify real estate. And so this is one of the ways of doing that, is to talk about land and to maybe think about land a little bit differently, including how we quote unquote own land or hold land. So, okay, so let's dive in to talking about whose land are we living on. So who was here before? So let's start right now. And today we're in 2023, November. So do you know who used to live in your house that you're living in, or your apartment? Before you moved there, do you know who used to live there? I know that before I lived in this house, there was one owner, and I know her name. I actually was able to meet her before she passed away. But yeah, maybe you only know the names of the people that used to live in your house because they were on the documents when you signed them and bought the house. Or maybe if you're in an apartment and you're renting, you still get the previous tenant's mail, or maybe many tenants' mail. So yeah, feel free to write in the chat, or if you want to share, if you know who was in the place that you were living in before you.
I have no idea.
Okay. I didn't know who lived in my previous house. I had no idea because it was like a flipper that I bought it from. And so that's all I knew, is that somebody flipped it. But
I know the immediate owner before us, but not the previous one back to when the house was built around 1950.
yeah. Cool. All right. So let's go, and we're gonna go backwards. So a little bit farther. So maybe your house was built in the 50s like mine, and so there was only one owner. Or maybe your house was built over 100 years ago, and so maybe there have been many owners, and maybe they rented rooms out. And so maybe you don't have a record of everybody who used to live in your house. Maybe there was a house and something happened to it and it was demolished and there was a new house built in its place. I also, when I was putting out information about this workshop, people were commenting about how they used to find marble, or they found a bunch of marbles in their backyard. And I just imagine kids playing in the backyard, playing marbles, and then losing them, right? Or leaving them outside and they got buried.
That is so weird you said that, because I have lived here 40 years and I keep digging up marbles out of my front and backyard.
Yeah. I've heard that from so many people, like at least 3 people that commented. You're the fourth person now. I guess that's what people did back then was play marbles before, all of our screens that we have. Um, or I know some people they've found glass bottles because there used to be outhouses
Mhm.
and they would throw the bottles or whatever in the outhouse and then you could dig them up and they didn't disintegrate because they were glass. So, and I also know I grew up in the Bay Area and I remember my parents would find arrowheads and we know that those are probably from the native people who lived on that land. So, okay, let's go. Or go ahead. Did you want to share?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say we also have a lot of stuff that comes out of our backyard.
I think your
for-
sound maybe isn't connected to the wrong.
yeah, my microphone is not very good. Sorry.
That's better.
Yeah. The our, our house is on fill. It used to be a wetland, and then they basically dumped a couple of feet of fill on it. And so a couple feet down, we run into everything from fire pits to old French drains running along the alley that used to run through our backyard.
Yeah. Fire pit. I heard fire pit, and then I kind of trailed off.
Fire pits and a French drain.
Oh, French drain.
Underneath our backyard. That
Yeah.
leads to the old alley.
Thank you. So, okay, so now let's go back even farther. Thinking about what your neighborhood looked like even before it was your neighborhood. So maybe you have articles. I have some articles that I'm going to share about when your neighborhood was being built, the neighborhood as you know it now, like I'm in Tahoe Park, I was in Colonial Heights. And of course, also we have to think about when we're looking at news articles, like who was writing the news and who got to report the news and who actually, right? Who did we get to see the information from? So the ones I have to share are, this is Colonial Heights, and this is the neighborhood that I first moved to when I moved to Sacramento. And this is the grand opening advertisement that they put in the newspaper for Wednesday, May 11th for Sacramento's ideal subdivision. And they have a picture here of the trolley car line that connected downtown Sacramento to Colonial Heights. And then there's a couple other pictures here about what it actually looked like in the neighborhood. There was a tower, kind of archway, a couple of them actually, one here and then one over here, kind of as a welcome entrance to the neighborhood. And then in this picture, it just kind of looks like a bunch of empty land with maybe one house over here, like a farmhouse. So some things we can find out about by looking in the newspaper and seeing yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, my phone's dying. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Let's go plug it in, hopefully. Yeah, so that's some of the information that I've been able to find when we had newspapers, right? So we can only go back as far as that goes back. And then I also have some information that was just shared with me about a neighborhood, like a mini sub neighborhood in Tahoe Park, Tahoe Terrace, called Monte Vista. And so I did a side by side here, and you can see this little square here matches up with this. This is the current Google map. It matches up here. But you can see that part of it was kind of taken out and transformed. And then these houses up here, it looks like were maybe demolished so that the freeway could be built. And we can talk about how that process happens. But I believe, and Andrew, did you share this photo with me? Yes.
Yeah, I posted it on the Facebook Facebook thread.
Yeah.
Something I've been looking at for a while, and yeah, it's sort of more of an industrial strip up near the railroad. But yeah, that's basically where it is. You got alignment pretty well there. You can still see the alleys, but we're in the southwestern quadrant of that little cross formation.
Hmm.
That's the part that was replatted and covered in fill back in the 1940s.
Yeah. And so it's thinking, and yeah, so again, we have this map, but things have changed over time. And I think you also took us back, kind of back to the this map was from 1888. And then before that, we know that it was a Nisenan community that was near the river, because we have the river here in Sacramento. So a little bit of kind of like very local neighborhood information. And I'm sure most, like a lot of neighborhoods would have this kind of information if you dig for it. And so it would be really interesting to see like what this looks like across the country with different neighborhoods. And of course, California is not as old, let's say, as like the East Coast either. So okay, and of course, we're talking about land, and we also have to talk about who actually was living here back then, because I wasn't here, and I don't think maybe most of us on the call were here 100 years ago. So let's talk about who actually was living here on the land. Okay, this is kind of a funny slide. Dinosaurs and bees. Okay, there were animals. It's fine. That's not really what we're talking about today, but I don't want to leave the bees out. So there's this really cool map. It's the native land map. And the link to this is, here, I'll put it in the chat. It's native-land.ca. And this map is a place where you can go, and basically you can zoom in and you can see all the overlaps of all the different native communities that were around the world. And so here in Sacramento, we have the Sacramento Valley was originally home to the Miwok, the Nisenan, Southern Maidu, the Valley Plains Miwok people. And you can see how it kind of overlaps though, because people don't have set boundaries all the time, right? They kind of move, and depending on the water and and we didn't, they didn't have maps back then to tell us exactly where they were. So those were the people who were here before we had our neighborhoods and before we had our street names and our city names. These are the people that were here. And there are 109 federally recognized tribes in California. There are more than that that aren't federally recognized. But that is how many we have currently. And I actually wanted to share, I went to Evansville, Indiana this year, and I went on a tour of the Angel Mounds, which was very interesting because these look just kind of like hills, but they're not. They were communities. And actually I learned that they're in a lot of different places, and that actually there are some in the Bay Area. And so this one is called Angel Site. It was a large prehistoric town that was between 1000 and 1450 CE. And you can see here kind of the layout of the town. They had the mounds and a big structure on top of the mound where like maybe a leader lived, or they did rituals and ceremonies. And then they had little other structures around where people lived, like a neighborhood or a community that we would see today. And at its peak, around 1000 people lived here in this one. And then there was a plaque here that talked about what their homes looked like, and they shared that the homes were a large rectangle or square room with a fire pit in the center and sleeping benches around the walls, and the roofs were thatched. And they estimated that 200 homes were at the site. And so it's just interesting to think about, right? Like all of the land that we're on basically was at one time somebody else's land. And so like I was thinking about these mounds and I was like, well, does every hill that I'm looking at a mound like this? And they're not, but they might, I don't know, but they might be, right? Because we don't know. We don't unearth like every single hill and mountain to see what's underneath it.
They're the lowland Nisenan were mound builders. There are a number of mounds up there. Construction was happening in the area, including the one that Sutter's Fort is located on.
Say that again.
Sorry, there are a number of Nisenan mounds in the area. They were also mound builders, and Sutter's Fort is located on one of their mounds.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So see, everywhere we go, there's a reminder of the people who are here before us. So let's talk a little bit about land. We talked a little bit about we worked a little bit backwards. We talked a little bit about people. Now let's go back to talking about land a little bit and how we think about land. So we have these maps, and this map is actually from 1835 showing the Republic of the United States of Mexico. This is from the California State University Monterey Bay map collection. And so in 1835, these were the territories, and this is what what belonged to Mexico at that time. And then as we move through to 1846, there is the map of the United States of Mexico Republic, which shows a little bit more detail, has a little bit more land. And then it starts talking about 1836 to 1853 when Mexico lost some of its land. And it could be lost, maybe it was stolen. Right? We can think about like what actually happened. But again, just like looking at the map and seeing like, wow, that whole portion used to be a different country. And what does that mean for the people that were part of that country and like their artifacts and all of the things that are probably buried in our land somewhere from all of these communities. And this map is from the National Geographic Society. And then again, this is the Compromise of 1850 when California was asked to be admitted to the Union. And there was a question over whether slaves would be allowed or not. And California was like, no, we don't want to do the slave thing. And then Utah and New Mexico were like, they can do whatever they want. And so it's thinking about like how the land was formed, on what values it was formed, and looking back and how that has formed where we are today. This is also from the National Geographic. And then this slide is talking about the Native American removal from the Southeast. And so we know that people were displaced, and this map shows when people were displaced from the South, they kind of moved over towards above Texas. And so they kind of migrated, right? And so that kind of ties into what has happened a lot of times in history and what's happening today. We're seeing it happening like literally right now in Gaza, where people are literally having to move from their home to a different space. And in this, in the description of this this is also from National Geographic. They talk about how at that time, a lot of Americans opposed the Indian removal. The first bill in Congress passed by only 103 votes to 97 votes. But since the demand for new land was high and the former Army officers used their experiences to gain political popularity and get elected, those were the decisions that were made and people were displaced because of it. And so just thinking about how that all like impacts where people live and who gets to live where. And then this picture is again about the secessions. And so talking about how the Native people made up all of the US, and then over time, their land was taken away to where we are over here. This only goes to 1972, so there's even less now, but you can see that there's very little land that the Native tribes actually own today. Okay, how are we doing? Any questions, comments? Keep going. Okay. So how do we use land? This was very interesting to me to see how the world's land is actually used. So 1% up here is freshwater, only 1%. That's lakes, rivers, and water bodies. Then we have 10% is the ocean. 7% is cropland. Forests are 26%, so a quarter of our land is forest. Livestock, 27%, so a little bit more than forest is livestock. Barren land is 19%, so we still have barren land. And then the built up area is only 1%. So the built up area and freshwater are tied for 1%, which is kind of amazing to think about how much land that is still available and empty. I know in some parts of the world, there is more barren land than other parts of the world and more population and all of that. So that's one map of how we use our land. And then this is global land use for food production. So 29% of the Earth's surface is land and 71% is ocean, as somebody also commented on in my post. So let's just build on the water. Well, we could do that. San Francisco has done that, and sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail, and their buildings start leaning over. But if you have good engineers, I guess we could do that. And then, but it's again, just talking about how half of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture and how we get our food and what we use half of our land for. So who decides what happens to the land? Okay. So going back a little bit to the previous slide where we talked about the differences, and I said in part of it, it was like the freeway might have taken some of those houses, and that might not be right. But I know that in a lot of cases, the freeways do take up land. They do take up people's houses to put up freeways. So, but in this case, I want to share, this is the story of Bruce's Beach. And so Bruce's Beach is down in Los Angeles. And this land, this parcel here with this very nice giant event center, it was purchased by a Black family, and they turned it into a retreat center for other Black vacationers to come and feel safe and comfortable. And the surrounding neighbors got angry and didn't want to see that happen. And so they took the land from the people, and actually last year they were able to give the land back. So the LA County gave the land back to this family. And so that was one case of a family actually getting their land back. So we know that more than 1 million Black people were displaced, according to the US Department of Transportation, when America created the highway system. And private property was seized by eminent domain, and hundreds of neighborhoods across the country were demolished. And here in Sacramento, we know that the Oak Park neighborhood, they kind of split it in half. So half of it was Oak Park and the other half is Curtis Park, and the freeway runs down the middle. And that happens, I know, in San Francisco as well, where some of the houses, they actually moved the houses from the city down to the valley because they had to build the freeway. So they would sell the houses for $1 after they kicked people out of them through eminent domain. And then people could move them if they had enough money to do so to another place. So eminent domain happens and it's not great, but there are some stories of holdouts that I wanted to highlight because I thought it was very interesting. We have Edith Macefield in Seattle. Her house was was where they got the story for Up, the movie, because she refused to leave her house. She didn't want to sell it for $1 million. And so they built the building all around her house. And that house, to my knowledge, is still there today. And then there's the Figo house that is in Portland. Similarly, they built all of the buildings around the house. And then this one is in Atlantic City, the Coking house, where again, they built the building all around the house. This one actually isn't there anymore because they ended up, this was the casino, and the casino went out of business, and eventually everything was demolished. Another thing that happens to land is construction. And so, yes, let's see. There was a house in the El Cerrito Home Depot parking lot for a while. Oh, wow. Probably the same thing. I gotta look that one up. That's a good one. That would be interesting. Oh, I know exactly where that is. That's by the BART station. Okay, cool. And maybe is that where the Starbucks is now? They finally tore it down and built the Starbucks. We'll have to see. Okay. So again, in those instances of people kind of like standing up to the businesses, like they were going to give them $1 million for their house, which is was a lot of money back then. It still is a lot of money. And so having the ability to say, no, I don't want to sell my house, I don't want $1 million, it can take a lot of support too. And I know in some of those cases, there was legal help helping these people to fight back against the businesses and say, hey, you can't kick me out of my house. I know also now with a high-speed rail project, there are some lawsuits about people and eminent domain because the high-speed rail, there was even there's a 7-Eleven story about how they tried to kick out a 7-Eleven, and 7-Eleven is not a small company, so I think they're going to fight back. Yeah, eminent domain. I don't think it's a great thing, but construction. Okay, so what happens during construction is they dig. So, and how this relates to our Native ancestors, Native people, is that they'll find remains when they're digging because, as we discussed, right, like there were communities everywhere. And so this is a recent one in Davis. It was in August, where they were, I believe it was at the high school, and they found remains. And so there's a whole process now that's been created so that if this happens, they have to stop construction and they get the coroner to come out. If they find out that they're Native remains, then they notified the Native American Heritage Commission. they search the database, and they try to find somebody who is going to be a descendant of that deceased, so that they can take their appropriate steps to dispose of those remains with dignity and move them where they need to be moved. Just try to have some respect for the remains. And in California, in the last fiscal year, there have been over 65 discoveries of native human remains, and 10 in Sacramento region, which makes sense because, again, native people were all over the area. And so if we're digging in the ground, like underground parking structures, we're gonna find those remains. There was another example, or another case that's happened in Redwood City, where they were building a parking structure. And this one was in October, actually last month. And they found that it was the site of a Native American burial ground. And so they found a lot of remains there as well, which also in the article, it talks about how they thought it had already been like dug through, or like already messed up too much, that like there wouldn't be any more remains. But since they were digging so deep, like they found more. Again, I think it's like the mound, right? Like the mound was so big and they didn't know. So they thought the whole thing was already destroyed, but it apparently wasn't. So yeah, just lots of cases where we're faced with who used to be here before we were here, and what do we do about it? Like, what steps do we take to make sure that those people are respected and that the right thing happens to them? So what do we do now that we know all of this about who used to live here and the land? And so what do we do now that we know, if we want to be kind of like more thoughtful humans? One thing is the Shumi land tax. And so what Shumi is a Chochenyo word for gift. And this is a way for non-Indigenous people to participate in the rematriation of the land to Indigenous people. And so the Shumi land tax is a voluntary annual contribution that you can make to support the work. And this one here is the Sogorea Te Land Trust, which is in the Bay Area. And it's a land trust run by women, Indigenous women. And so it's one way that people like me who are not Indigenous can give back and kind of acknowledge that I'm living on stolen land, and try to help remedy that in a very small way. And I will put the link to this website in the chat. Another thing that we can do is land back. And so over the past few years, we've seen a lot of movements to actually return land like Bruce's Beach back to Indigenous people, or, the Black families. And so this headline, movement to return land taken from Black and Indigenous people in the US gains momentum. That is from January of last year. Native American tribes reclaim California redwood land for preservation. And so this was a really big deal. 10 tribes inhabiting the area will be responsible for protecting the land. And so it's just thinking about, okay, these people, their culture and their customs are more about taking care of the land and honoring the land. And so if we give the land back to them, then maybe they'll be able to do that in a more thoughtful way. instead of us just demolishing all the land. Okay. And then there's a couple more, let's see. This one, Bay Area nonprofit returns 43 acres to female-led Indigenous land trust. This is the Segurite Land Trust. And so 43 acres is like, that's a big deal. And then Oakland plans to return 5 acres of city park to Indigenous group, one of the first cities to do so. And that was in September of last year. And so just this idea of returning the land. Ooh, another one. Yes. Let's see. This is Ancestral Lands Chirp. Nissan.
Change it to Nissan again. It does that all the time. Drives me nuts.
What was that?
Autocorrect change Nissan to Nissan. Does that all the time.
Oh, yeah. Nissan. Gotcha. We're not talking about the car company. Ancestral Homelands Reciprocity Program. Oh, thank you for sharing this. This is great. And this one is the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe. Cool. I'll make sure that gets put in our when we post this video as well. Love it. And so let's see. Okay. Another thing that we can do is change things like statues. So in our city, I know there have been many statues that have come down in the past few years. And this statue actually just went up November 7th of this year in Capitol Park, and it's a Native American monument. And I believe I'm not quite sure, but I know there was another statue, the Junipero Serra statue, and I believe this went in its place, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Yeah. So again, kind of rewriting history, but thinking about, okay, like when we heard the story about history, whose viewpoint was it told from? And does it need to be rewritten and told from a different viewpoint? And in this case, the answer was yes. So that also goes for changing names. So I know you probably know a lot of sports teams are changing their names here in Sacramento. We had middle schools change their names. So there was Sutter Middle School. It's now Miwok Middle School. That is so great. I love that. Sutter, the name Sutter is like everywhere in Sacramento. And so like changing that is amazing. And then we have Peter Burnett Elementary School turned into Sui U Elementary School. And then Kit Carson is now Umoja International Academy. So some people people have different opinions on changing names, but I think what we call things goes back to how we value and what we value. And so just like where we put our money shows what we value as well. But that's also because we live in a capitalistic society. So yeah. Even like street names, it's interesting to getting back to neighborhoods, right? Like street names, school names, just all the names. And then this was an interesting website that I haven't been able to dig a lot into, but it's called whereismyland.org. And this one is specifically to help Black Americans discover connections to stolen land through research, data, and technology, and to help them reclaim that land. Again, just reclaiming land and trying to right the wrongs that have happened in history. And so the other thing I think that we can all do is just continue learning, and knowledge is great. And we haven't quite been talking for an hour, but we could go on for a very long time. We have the California State Indian Museum. That is the California run by the National Park. And then we have the Gorman Museum. It's actually a museum of Native American art that was just reopened in a new building at UC Davis. And then we have the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center in Santa Rosa. And they have an online, like you can kind of go online and be in the museum, which is very cool. Yeah, I will say that there's a lot that we could have talked about, and there's a lot more that we could talk about. And so I probably missed many things. So please just know that I know that I cannot cover everything. And yeah, but I would love to hear what you thought, what you found most interesting, most helpful, or if there's something that we should like do part 2. Yeah, anything you want to share?
I appreciate that you put this together and you educated yourself and shared what you found out, and especially someone in the real estate industry where your whole deal is buying and selling stolen land. So learning about the backstory is really important. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm a really different kind of real estate agent, but I think that this has such a, like, where you live, where you decide to buy your house, like all of this history, maybe you don't feel it. Some people feel it and they'll be like, I feel all this history. But I feel like it's still there. And so honoring it, or even like knowing, I know in Colonial Heights, like that neighborhood used to be grapevine before. I mean, not back in the day, but before it was the neighborhood, it was grapevines. And so just even knowing that and being like, oh, that's why I have a really old grapevine in my backyard. Like, oh, now it makes sense. And so or even over there, they had really cool street name. Well, their street names were actually named after counties, which, so like Sacramento, Sonoma, which I think was much more exciting than like 55th Street or something. So like I like to, again, like, why did it get changed and rewritten to this boring number? That's what fascinates me, and I think it's super interesting. So and then just the whole aspect of land and holding land and owning land. I don't actually think we can actually own land, because like we can't pick it up and take it with us. I mean, we could try, but we can't really. And so the whole fact about owning land is an interesting concept, and another reason why I'm part of the Community Land Trust, because that is more thinking about land as a community entity and not just like one person owning this thing. So I think that the real estate industry can look a whole lot different than it does now if we start thinking about land in a different way. And especially like affordability too. Right now, we know that a lot of people can't afford homes. And so what does that mean when we have a bunch of empty land and a bunch of people that need place to live, and it's kind of mismatched? So anyways, there's lots of thoughts, but thank you for joining. Let's see. Oh, I have a quote to end us. And I took this from the Santa Rosa Native American website. It says, the future of humankind lies waiting for those who will come to understand their lives and take up their responsibilities to all living things. And that is Vine Deloria Jr., a Native American scholar. So let's see. That's all I got for us today. But thanks for joining. Yeah, I think it was very interesting. And I'm excited for everyone who watches the replay. Hopefully they'll put comments about what they learned. And I learned new things too. Thank you for sharing in the chat. Some more things we can look up and investigate and just keep learning. Thank you.